Hi, my name is Chasity. I was diagnosed with uterine cancer in 2022. I live in Newark, New Jersey with my husband. We have no children, but we have a dog named Rocco that we adore. We both work in the financial industry and we enjoy dining out in New York City, traveling, walks in nature, and just hanging out at home. So my journey started it goes back as far as 2012. So I was diagnosed in 2022, but my symptoms, what I feel started in 2012, which were kind of explained away as perimenopause, which could fall into that category. You know, you start getting irregular bleeding. It's erratic. It's not on the same schedule as you once, had your planned cycle. And now it's just becoming erratic and you kind of just get used to it. But I ended up going to a gynecologist in 2012 and they found cysts on my ovaries, which, is kind of a normal thing, nothing too alarming. But they kind of just explained that's probably what was causing the abnormal bleeding. So over the course of since 2012 and 2022, I had a number of procedures done. We're talking two DNCs. I had a saline sonogram, which is where they go in and look at the structure of the uterus, just try to see if there's anything unusual. They look at the lining because it's always about how thick is your lining getting. So when you're in that perimenopause state and you are bleeding a lot, the lining gets thicker and thicker. So they're concerned that it can turn into something like hyperplasia or cancer. So I was probably every 6 months being seen by my OBGYN for some type of new procedure. So it was constantly something being investigated because it felt like every time I would go to get something done, whether it was something as invasive as a surgery like a DNC or an endometrial biopsy, I ended up having three of those. It was coming back, nothing was found. But it was one of those things where I intuitively knew something was wrong, even though these tests were showing nothing. So, but my journey did start in 2012, but it just went each year, like I said, being seen by my doctor and having these like, oh, we're not finding anything. It's probably just perimenopause. Just continue to take Provera, which was a form of birth control that's supposed to help the lining of the uterus. But I had really bad, side effects from that. So I wasn't a big fan of taking that. But that was what was offered to me, or getting an IUD placed, which I declined to get that done because it just sounded kind of scary having something like that where you could, like, if you felt like had side effects that you couldn't take it out yourself. My female gynecologist was in a way being a little dismissive by saying, this is probably just perimenopause. Um, but when the bleeding got so bad that I was passing huge, huge clots and this became severely anemic, I was going for weekly iron infusions because my hemoglobin had dropped to a dangerously low level. I was just exhausted all the time. I could barely get up and do normal activities in life, like getting up and going to work it would just take everything out of me. I could barely go up a flight of stairs. I knew something like this. I was looking around, I was asking my friends that are around the same age group that were going through perimenopause. None of them were having what was happening to me happen. So that's what another thing that kind of pushed me thinking this is just not normal. After the two DNCs, and then I had two more endometrial biopsies, which all came back finding nothing. I ended up seeking another opinion from another OBGYN because I wanted to get a referral to look into getting an endometrial ablation. And that's where they basically burn or destroy the lining of your uterus, and it's supposed to stop the bleeding. So her recommendation was, I know you just had an endometrial biopsy. Let's wait 6 months and give you another one just to be safe, because if we destroy that tissue, it's going to be harder to investigate anything more to see if there's anything else going on, because she was really concerned about my symptoms. Like I said, the bleeding so bad where you were just severely anemic and passing clots and just really, I think we all, as women, we say that we bleed heavy, but this was on another level of bleeding heavy. I don't want to get too graphic, but I almost felt like I couldn't go anywhere because I was gonna have an accident. So that's how bad it was. So I went back to her after 6 months and had my third endometrial biopsy, and that is when the cancer was discovered. Well, I knew when I went to get my, after having so many tests and procedures done, they usually just give you things over the phone or a letter, something like that. I knew when they told me to come back in person and to bring somebody with me that it was not good news. So I brought my husband with me and my dog, and got the news that I had, they did find cancer, endometrial carcinoma in my uterus, and referred me to an OBGYN gynecologist. And of course, whenever you hear the words cancer, your mind immediately goes fear, dark, scary, you're going to die. I mean, you think the worst, right? I mean, the initial impact of all that information. And she's talking to me, and I can't even hear her because I'm just trying to process everything. So once the initial shock wears off, and you 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 you're able to listen, and what are my options, because at this point you don't know if the cancer has moved around. At this point, like I said, I've had this bleeding for over 10 years, so my mind was instantly going, oh God, is it now moved, is it in my ovaries now, is this why the bleeding was so heavy? So it's the constant questioning of everything. And then, of course, we all get on Google, and that's when it's worst case scenario. Like, is it stage one, stage two, stage three, stage four? So I did find relief in going on to some Facebook groups for endometrial cancer, people that are diagnosed with that. And just anything that I could read that was relatable with women that were going through the same thing. That's all I craved at that point. I just wanted to hear from women that had the same diagnosis and how did they deal with it. I was referred to an OBGYN oncologist in Teaneck, New Jersey, and that's when she explained the standard of care, which was pretty much taking everything out, ovaries included. And that was probably the hardest decision for me, because I had read a lot of online about when you take your ovaries out, like, and you go into surgical menopause, the extreme shock that your body goes into, and it can also increase cardiovascular risks. So there was just so much to think about, and I think that's probably one of the most stressful things when you have any kind of health concerns, especially a cancer diagnosis, is the decision making. Am I making the right decision with treatment? So I opted, after thinking about this a lot and doing as much research as possible, I opted to remove my ovaries. One was because I was 50 at the time, which is close to the median age of menopause for women. So I was a little bit less risky in that regard. And then also, I didn't want to. I was trying to avoid having a second surgery if that was going to, happen later on down the line. And my oncologist was strongly recommending to do it as well. So yeah, I ended up having a full hysterectomy with ovaries removed. A pelvic wash, and then they removed some lymph nodes as well to see if the cancer had spread, which it had not. It was I was diagnosed with stage 1A uterine cancer, which meant it was all contained in my uterus. It's funny because the day that she told me that, it was day 3 in the hospital. So I should also mention I had a really, really rough recovery from this hysterectomy. And all the research I was doing online, and I had a few friends that had had hysterectomies, they were all kind of downplaying how it was not a very difficult surgery, and that they were released from the hospital, some the same day, some the next day. That was not my experience. I ended up having to stay in the hospital for 5 days due to complications. And so I had like CAT scans done. What ended up happening was I had a fever that wouldn't break, and the hospital wouldn't release you without knowing why the fever was occurring. So I had CAT scans done to look for like pulmonary embolisms. I was being treated or tested to make sure I didn't have sepsis, which is common after a hysterectomy. Um, I had scans of my legs to make sure there was no blood clots. Everything was coming back fine. The CAT scan did show that I had a partial collapsed lung, which was probably a complication from the anesthesia. So I was having shortness of breath, a really, really fast heart rate. And I just felt like, I just felt, I mean, everybody feels bad after surgery, but my body, I think it was just so inflamed that it just had a really, really strong reaction to the surgery. So I wasn't even able to leave the hospital until like the fifth or sixth day. But on the third day, when she told me that, I was, of course, relieved to hear that it was all contained in my uterus, and basically felt like, okay, that this was the solution that I needed. And I wasn't going to have radiation or chemo, which thank God, because my body was already struggling with the surgery. But so of course I was relieved to hear that. But at the same time, I was just so frustrated with my recovery and dying to get out of that hospital. But overall, very relieved and very fortunate. I thought by being released from the hospital and going home, I was going, of course, there's nothing like the comfort of your own bed, and just you can eat the foods that you want and heal better. But unfortunately, that's when my surgical menopause symptoms kicked in, and it was a nightmare. I would wake up in the middle of the night drenched in sweat. I'm talking my hair wet. I would have to get up in the middle of the night, take a shower, change my sheets. This happened for the first 2 weeks that I was home, where I would wake up in these night sweats. And then I also started to experience severe abdominal pain, joint pain. I had severe anxiety, unprecedented anxiety. I've always suffered with a little bit of anxiety, but this was on another level. And I just kept feeling like, how am I going to move on with my life? Like, what's happening with me? But your hormones, when they get shocked like that, it can really take a toll on your body. And I almost felt like, is this my new life? Did I make the right decision? So in all these moments, that's what I'm dealing with. Did I make the right decision removing the ovaries and now shocking my body and going into this surgical menopause? I almost feel like that was probably one of the worst things than dealing with the cancer itself, was that surgical menopause. That's my experience. The bleeding, at least I got used to that and I could deal with it, even though I was exhausted. But not knowing how long this was going to last, this day in, day out, waking up in night sweats, having the anxiety during the day, the fear, um, every little ping that you get, you start obsessing. Is something coming back? Like, what is going on? And then just the healing itself from the surgery. When you have a hysterectomy and they stitch you up at the very top after taking everything out, that wound has to heal. And then I started reading about complications of that, and it just, oh God, it was just very overwhelming. So I ended up, during my break off of work, I went into therapy, and I just took as much time. Once I was able to walk, I got out in nature, and I just tried to focus, on just healing, and not just my body, but my mind. I felt like my mind was the part I wasn't prepared for. And just, you know, yeah, it's hard to put into words what you're feeling in those moments, but I did journal during that time, and this was in September of 2022. And now when I look back on that, I see how far I've come, healing wise. I also want to mention, during my recovery, like 3 months into my recovery, I was also diagnosed with another condition. And that was probably why I had such a rough recovery, because this was happening in the background, but it was undiagnosed. I was also dealing with primary hyperparathyroidism. And that's parathyroids. You have four of them, and they're located behind your thyroid. And when they become diseased, they can wreak havoc on your system. And so I fortunately had to have another surgery to get three of those glands. They were diseased and had to come out. And like, finding out I needed another surgery after I was already having such a traumatic experience with the hysterectomy and ovary removal, I just, it wasn't the last thing I wanted to hear. So it was just like a double whammy, like, oh, like, now you have, this is wrong with you too. So that really took a toll on me. But it also made me dig really deep into myself. And I feel like that's when you find out who you are, what you're made of. And also, if this whole experience has really taken me on a spiritual journey as well. So I would say, I'm not a religious person, but I've always believed in a creator. My cancer experience led me down a spiritual journey and really put things in perspective for me. I know the value of having peace of mind and find joy in the simple things, just, like being in nature. I'm 51, which is the age that my mom was when she passed away. So I wake up every morning in gratitude and knowing every day is a blessing. My main message in telling this is to just listen to your body. We can go to a female doctor and think, oh, that they have the same, setup as me. They're going to know what this feels like, but that's not always the case. It's just between your late 30s and into your 50s, you have this perimenopause where your hormones are changing, and that I don't even recognize my body at a certain point. But I guess what I'm trying to say is just listen to your body. Know symptoms. Like, of course there's symptoms for perimenopause, but then those can also mimic something like cancer as well. So I do feel like doing too much Googling is not a good thing, but I just want people to also be aware of symptoms, for cancer, endometriosis, any type of gynecological problem, and to keep at it, keep going, get second opinions, get third opinions. When you feel like something isn't right, you know your body better than any doctor ever would.